I should probably start like Henny Youngman said, who used to say, I just flew in from Washington, D.C. Boy, my arm's tired. My name is Lenny Campello. Just go by Lenny, because my dad called me Florencio in spite of my mom's protest. So when I enlisted in the Navy, I was 17 years old, and for the first year, all my paychecks were to Florence. So technically, I was the first female on ships. I want everybody to know that. So let's get started here. The other thing that I wanted to say, of course, is that I'm honored to be here. When I was asked to jury this show, I did all the Googling and everything, and I was really, really impressed by the job that all the previous competitions I've done over the years. And it shows in the immense variety and diversity of the artwork submitted. When I saw the map, and I saw that entries came from all over the country, we got to work in Idaho and Nevada. But the entries came from all over the country. I was actually flabbergasted with that. I didn't realize it, because when you're jurying it, you're doing it from the image, right? Which is the way that it should be. You know, the artwork speaks first, and then everything else follows. So when I used to be an art student, I always used to wonder, why is this old guy up front? What makes him able to talk about stuff? So I'm going to talk a little bit about me. Too many schools. I went to, I was raised in Brooklyn. Right across the street was a convent, a church, and a Catholic school. We could not get away with anything. The nuns used to patrol the neighborhood in bikes. So I went to Our Lady of Loretto in Brooklyn. Then I went to Aviation High School, an hour away in the subway. I think it's crazy, but people do that, and they still do it in New York, right? You get in the subway, an hour later, you're at your high school. I enlisted in the Navy, then I went to, eventually got selected to be an officer, so I went to study at the University of Washington School of Art in Seattle. I had never been to Seattle in my entire life, but I had a girlfriend that lived there, so that was the only reason. My son, who's 13, is astounded that I declined Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. Simply because, I went to there, when they took us to the place, and they were okay, but my girlfriend lived in Seattle, so we picked Seattle. I'm an artist. I studied art at the University of Washington, not that the Navy paid for that. I was going to be a cryptologist, so they paid for a math degree, which was brutal, but I got through. And the School of Art was in the same school as mathematics. When the Navy found out I was going for a double degree, I got called in and they said, well, if you have time to study for 2 degrees, you can graduate in half the time. And I told them, that's not how math works. You have to do math 200 before 300. You can't just jump ahead. When I graduated, I was told by the school that I was the only student in the entire history of the University of Washington to graduate with a double degree in math and art. Those combinations don't really exist. I retired from the Navy very young, so I opened an art gallery in Washington, D.C., in Georgetown, about a third of the size, in fact, about this big, 200 square feet. And a few years later, a second gallery in Bethesda, at the time the largest gallery in the D.C. area. We were doing really, really well. COVID has killed both those galleries, which is actually a good thing, because my accountant at one point, I promise you I'm not going to stay that long on each slide. My accountant at one point said, about 80% of all your expenses are in the galleries, and about 90% of all your sales are in art fairs. So we're going to talk about art fairs since we have a lot of artists here. I write art criticism. I've written art criticism my entire life. When I was at Washington, I discovered that you can have a little bit of a nice footprint if you also wrote about art. Talk more about that. I do collect art. The most expensive painting, and I didn't buy it because of value or whatever. I bought it because I liked it. When I went to Seattle, my uncle, who had never in his life been outside of New York, as far as I know, other than maybe New Jersey, sent me a hunting rifle because I was in Seattle, right? I went hunting one time. I froze my butt. And I decided that wasn't for me. So I pawned my rifle. I remember I got a couple $100. This is 1977, so it must have been a nice, really nice rifle, right? And on the way back from the pawn shop, I walked by a gallery and they were selling artwork in there. I stepped in. It was by a guy who's an illustrator, now a well-known artist named Frank Frazetta. I put a deposit on it. The gallery said, it takes 6 months to pay. 4 years later, I finally paid off for it. That painting has never, ever hung in my house. I've been married a couple times, and all my wives have hated it. So, and it's probably the most valuable piece of art that I have. It's been in storage forever. I do go on TV in the DC area and on radio, usually on NPR, and a lot of times on the Voice of America to talk about art, generally in the DC region. I started a blog in 2003 called DC Art News, Lenny Campello Art News, my name. It's 6 million subscribers now. It's the 11th largest and most popular art blog in the world. Consult for art. Sotheby's initially, a few years ago, maybe 2 decades ago, I should say, started dealing with galleries to assist them. I'm one of their chartered dealers. And as you will learn today, I am also a speaker. Really? Okay, so you gotta remember this. Right? You gotta remember this. I also warn you that they told me an hour.
Yeah.
At some point, somebody, my wife usually is my timekeeper, right? So somebody here at some point is going to start going. Otherwise, you might be here tomorrow. All right, that's me when I enlisted in the Navy. That's me when I got commissioned. Back then, the Navy had beards. They just started having beards again. When they got rid of beards in 1987, I had my daughter, Vanessa, who you're going to meet pretty soon, was little. And it was fun. I took like half the beard off. And she's like prodding and sucking her thumb. Then I took slices off. She's sucking her thumb. Then I took it all off. And she laughed. And then she goes, okay, Daddy, now put it back. I wrote this book in 2011. For one glorious day, it was the best-selling art book in Amazon. And it's one day, yes. And it's my way of cataloging at the time what I thought were the DC area artists. And like almost like this show, I wanted to have not only the top best-known artists, but mid-career artists, and also emerging artists that could use to push in the book. It's still around, it's still selling. This is an art fair. This is Art Basel in Miami. I've been doing that since 2006. It's something that anyone that deals in the arts, from the collector, artist, or seller perspectives, you know. We'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, that's my dad. My dad, that's the Naval Base at Guantanamo, which is where I was born. My father's parents came from Galicia, which is the Celtic country in the north of Spain, up in the mountains. A lot of Cubans, especially in that part of Cuba, were Gallegos, Galicians. They have their own language. It's a Celtic language, pretty close to Irish. They bring an interesting tone to Cuban Spanish. Adios is the word for goodbye in Spanish. A lot of all Cubans know that, but most Cubans say abur, which is the Gaelic word for goodbye. Superhero. My mom, my dad used to say how she was the only girl that could beat all the boys at horse racing when she was young. And then she was really good at a bicycle, and when she moved to Miami, she actually rode that monster, incredibly enough. She died on her birthday when she was 97. She was made of steel. My daughter Elise, she's now the one that's made me a grandpa. She's got 2 kids. She's an actress and a theater actress. Lives in Gig Harbor outside of Seattle. It's kind of the big fish in town out there. Her older sister, the one that I just told the story, Vanessa. I'm introducing my family because it's part of it. And that's my son, Anderson. My wife was told that she could never have any more children, and now we have a 13-year-old. Yes. That's me at the University of Washington. I used to sell my artwork. Almost everything that I know about selling art, I learned at the Pike Place Market. Once my school assignment was graded, it was up for sale. Every art student recognizes these figure drawings, you know. So this is a charcoal drawing. That was sold. Abstract painting class, that was sold. Illustration class, that was sold. Drawing with a Sumi brush class, that was sold. Drawing with a Sumi class brush and learning how to do reflection, that was sold. Watercolor class, that's the kind of stuff. Portrait class, the Beatles. Printmaking class. Printmaking class. Collage class. My professor for collage was an African-American artist named Jacob Lawrence, who was probably the top 1% in the food chain of the art world. And he was a collagist. When I did this piece of Frida Kahlo, this is Frida Kahlo, the Mexican artist, who at the time I was developing sort of an artistic crush across the decades. And he looked at it and he said, yeah, except that I think it needs a little color. I was so mad, we were in the studio, I took the brush that was laying there and I threw it at the piece and it was red and splashed all red. And he went, yeah, except that this is a collage class and that's painting. So I spent all night fixing it. This is one of the few pieces of artwork that I still have of mine from that period. I never sold this one. This is painting in the style of a master. That showed up for auction in Florida like 5 years ago. Picasso style, Frida Kahlo again. My professor was sick and tired of Frida Kahlo. At the time, 77 to 81, she was Diego Rivera's wife. Now she's eclipsed him completely. More Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo, this is for portrait class, so I got 2 for the price of 1 because I got Frida and Elvis. In 1976, I did this. This is during the bicentennial, and I started doing artwork about Cuba. Because when I got to Washington, I discovered that all the left-wingers up there thought of Cuba this wonderful place, right? And I made it my mission in life to make sure that they knew what a horrible place they had become into, right? So, and by the way, I think at the time, 77, I was probably the only Cuban in the entire state of Washington, which maybe accommodated for that. So this piece was done, and Professor Lawrence, who was a collage artist, loved this work. But I inundated them with it over and over and over and over. These are all from art school. That piece ended up as the cover for this book. That's Jeff Bezos' aunt. Bezos' dad, who adopted him when he was a baby, is a Cuban immigrant. So he was sort of raised as in Texas or Houston, I believe. His grandmother lived right next to my mother in Miami, in which she refused to move from her little apartment, even though after he became rich. She's like, why would I move? Anyway, and more, and more. I just kept trying everything. I can tell you that every Cuban celebrity now I've discovered in the last 10 years, Gloria Estefan, Pitbull, well, I didn't even know it was Cuban. Cameron Diaz, well, I didn't know it was Cuban either. Garcia, what's his name? Andy Garcia. All these guys own this work now because the gallery gets notes from them wanting to verify. So it's like all of a sudden this work that I did in art school, the reason I'm talking about this mostly to the artists is about establishing the footprint of artwork, which I think is important. I'm going to talk about and more. And this is the last one, I promise. This is in the Cuban Museum of the American Smithsonian Museum of the Cuban Diaspora, which is in Miami. And this is a piece of glass, and this is called the Cuban Transformation Machine, which means that when you look at it, you see yourself as a Cuban that's behind bars. Okay, after I got commissioned in the Navy, I enlisted when I was 17, I got commissioned when I was 25, and I retired when I was 42. So still pretty young. I lived in this house. I was stationed in Scotland, like Lisa said. This is a little Keepit farmhouse built in 1534. Yes, it had ghosts. So artists, when they're in places, they like to do whatever's around them. So I did what was around me. Sheep, and more sheep, and more sheep, and more sheep. And then when there weren't any sheep, this is the road outside the farmhouse. Snow, and more snow, and deer everywhere, and more snow, and more snow. I'm trying to, every once in a while it did snow. And then Scotland is the most beautiful country in the world, by the way. When you walk through these places, you understand why people believed in magic. because it's absolutely a magical place. More snow. Also, I discovered that when farmers tilled the ground, if you live by the ocean, these guys come from everywhere. I've never seen anything like it, right? You guys probably go, yeah, this idiot doesn't know that. But it was new to me, and I was fascinated by it, right? So I started doing a lot of these kind of things. You know, the birds that live there, they're all nautical birds. These are Canada geese, and they're considered pests because they destroy the locks. But I did a lot of that work as well. This stone, I promise you I'll get off my work in a minute and talk about you guys' work. This stone was in my backyard. Lisa mentioned the Pictish people. The Picts were the original people of Scotland. Nobody knows what they called themselves. The Romans called them Pictites or painted because they used to paint themselves blue. And this stone was in my backyard, so I became very interested in that. So I started to develop a whole, they also built a lot of the standing stones. There's hundreds of these circles all over Scotland. You know, and in almost every place. A lot of the stones are very highly decorated inside. My daughter Elise, and her sister, they were Highland dancers. That little girl, in 1992, got awarded a medal by the Queen at the Highland Games as the youngest dancer. It's called a Baby Royal Medal. As the youngest dancer who can do the most complicated Highland dance. And the Scots were furious. That an American girl had won it. That's me trying to straighten out one of the standing stones. All right, so it led to me starting to do drawings about the Scottish people as I imagined them. Full of tattoos. They were fully tattooed from head to toe. The Romans eventually built the Antonine Wall and then Hadrian's Wall to keep them north of, because it was a case where the Romans won every battle and they lost the war. Because they used to paint their bodies with something called woad, which is like pure PCP, so you can imagine what that did. The Romans write that the Picts were so angry and so furious when they fought that they fought the Romans and each other. So it's pretty hard to win a battle if you're like also trying to kill your friends. But I continued to do a lot of that work. Eventually evolved into this. I call it written on the body, where the tattoos migrate to things that had an influence on me, like books. I know the Philip Roth. And this is called The Last Copy of the Constitution. And then, you know, kind of imaginations of, all right, so where am I kind of these days? That's my dad again. This was at American University Museum, had a show about immigrant artists. Notice the stuff on the background. That's me as a child in Cuba, me now, and then what plays through here is the story of my family. Superheroes, another attraction of mine. What goes through here is the old Batman series, episodes from there. More of that. Every once in a while I get political. This, if you know the story of Judith in Holofernes. Holofernes was an Assyrian general, had surrounded Israel. She came out. He was in lust with her. They went into the tent. She killed him. Cut his head, came out with the sack. So what plays through here is the face of all the current enemies of Israel. That's still 2,000 plus years later, still trying to destroy the Jewish state. Frida Kahlo returns, right? Again, through here, all of her paintings come. Notice the walls. More Frida Kahlo with her paintings coming in the background. Frida, she used to call her husband El Sapo, the frog, because he was so ugly, but she was in love with him. This stuff in there. Modern stuff, this is now the COVID age. What goes through here is abstract painting. It's online, so it's going to Google Images, pulling out every 5 seconds a new abstract painting. After about 3 days, you have to turn it off and reset it, because eventually it will go to porn, no matter what you're doing. So, same thing here. This is called A Girl in Love with Superheroes. So the images go and pull superhero imagery and pop it in there every 3 seconds. I also have cameras, so when you approach the painting, you become part of the work. You're in there. And people love to take their picture. These are art fairs. People just love to take photographs of themselves inside the artwork. Over and over and over. This is the actual piece. That's Stephen King, that's Fidel Castro, and that's me trying to take the picture in there, but that's with the camera. The camera is hidden in there somewhere. That's the actual work. Artwork can be fun. This is Desi, Lucy, and Fidel. and you know, you can tell by the expressions, and what's going on in here is the old show, right? And then this is Elvis and Buster Keaton as nuns. This is my latest thing. I'm almost done with me. My latest thing is I started doing art drawings on broken bisque. There's a gallery in Washington, D.C. These are walls. Each one of these is an individual drawing. People say, why do you do all that work? And the honest truth is, I do about 3 a night. I do it while watching TV while my wife makes me watch The Bachelor. I sit in bed with her doing these drawings. And this is President Obama. I do a lot of his imagery. And they're all on broken pieces. I love text. I've curated maybe 10 shows in my life about text and art. I think this is good instruction for artists. You know, in art school, they always tell you, oh, you got to find your thing and just stay with it. No, explore. You know, do whatever you want to do and explore it. And the texture of the work, I think, adds to it. They've been superbly successful. They've sold really, really well. I'm sort of obsessed with Marilyn Monroe. I found it so ironic. There was a Cuban actress that played her in the last. I was so predisposed to not like the movie, and she did a really good job. Just like the guy in that recent Elvis movie, there's like 4,000 Elvis impersonators, right? And they find a guy that doesn't look like Elvis, but when I saw the movie, I was in shock how good it was. Yeah, really, really good. Oscar Wilde. These always speak to me. Sometimes I do it in 2 pieces. This is called Sleep is the Cousin of Death. I had a rapper company that contacted me, and they were worried because that line appears in a rap song, and they're like, hey, you know, we want to make sure it's okay with you. I wrote a poem when I was in school, a really bad poem. It's about, you know, the thing, like, everybody has the dream where you're falling, and supposedly if you don't wake up before you hit the ground, you die. That's what the stupid poem is about. But then I resuscitated it into this artwork. I have a whole series of Hasidic Jews. I lived for a while in Israel, and I was fascinated. In Brooklyn, our neighborhood was right next to a Hasidic neighborhood in Williamsburg. And I was fascinated with them in Israel. This is like 100 degrees every day, and they're still wearing, you know, their stuff. But then these ladies are also wearing that, and it's still 100 degrees, and they still have giant habits. And this is called Sister with a Past, and I kind of added the pictish tattoos to her arms in there. All right, I also did cartoons for the Stars and Stripes. This is during Lebanon. Hey, I forgot. Who are you guys? We're the Amal Gorillas. Who are you? We're the Druze. Are we allies or enemies? I can't remember. Me neither. That's exactly what it was. It didn't make sense. I did all kinds. These were all published in the Stars and Stripes. The other day I found the original one in here. Typical sailor marine interaction. This one got a lot of comments back then. Still to this day, the U.S. Navy, you can't have any leisure aboard. If you think that's hard, you should try to sneak a bottle into a ship. And of course the ensign, okay ensign, one more time. Flight deck, topside. Hangar deck, inside. All right, let's start talking about the show. Does anybody have any questions on any of that? Okay, you can interrupt anytime. Right, some advice for artists. This I learned over the years. I teach a course now for like the last 25 years. It's called Boot Camp for Artists. It's 6 hours long, and it's the business part of art that I've learned over the last 30 plus years, right? The mistakes that I made. So these are things that I find in every show. When I have the gallery, the same thing. Artists will bring stuff. So you have to learn about color mats. The function of a mat is to separate the art from the glass. Not to enhance it, not to match your couch. None of that stuff. If your buyer wants to match the couch, that's up to them. But you should not have any kind of art, any kind of thing in your framing that distracts from the art. Okay? So that's the function. Acidic mats, there's no excuse. 30 years ago was a giant difference in price. Paper is made 2 ways. Well, you guys should know that, right? Because it's like in there, like a mill here. So paper, after World War II, they started making it from tree. Wood pulp has acid. It destroys the art. The paper that should be used for art is made from cotton. It's pH balanced, acid free. So every artist should know that. They don't teach that. Scratch frames, it's the time when you need to retire the frame. Okay? If it's all scratched up, you can't save it anymore. What I do with my frames that need retirement is I take the art that I'm trying to sell out, I put a piece of art in there that that maybe I did in art school, but still an original piece of art, reframe it, take it to a thrift shop. I actually don't even donate it. I walk right in with it and put it in their place up there. Huge signatures, big no-no. The art should be signed, right? The art should be signed. We need to be able to identify. Think of the Antique Roadshow in 100 years when they're trying to figure out if that's a real, where's Emma Lapine here? Lapine? Where? Out there. So if they're trying to figure out, is this a real Emma Lapine? Is it Lapine or Lapine? Lapine. I go through that too, because people are, is it Campello or Campello? And in Cuba it was Campello. So then I went to the village where my grandparents came from, and they go, oh no, it's Campello. I'm like, oh man, all this year. So if 100 years from now they're trying to figure out, is this a real Emma Lapine? You know, signatures are not, I'm not picking on you because you didn't sign it or anything, because you can't remember. Gold marker, that's got nothing to do with art for signatures, okay? Work should be signed. Picasso was a really horrible, great artist and a horrible man. He really was a real misogynist. And one of his ex-wives, every year he used to send 1 or 2 paintings that he never signed. And then he would tell people that those were fake. But there was a real fake market for Picasso work. When he died, his photographer, Robert Vavra, came up with the evidence saying, oh, these are real Picassos, you know. To this day, because they're not signed, they're like 30, 35% less at auction. Just because they're missing. Even though everybody knows it's Picasso, right? No need to put copyright notations in your signature. Just the signature and the date, it suffices. The Visual Art Copyright Act of 1976 says that as soon as you exhibit some piece of artwork, you own the copyright to it. No body frames. There is one piece in this work that actually the frame, I think, works for the work. I think the artist designed it on purpose. The job of a frame artist is to protect the artwork, not to add to it, enhance it. There are artists that do that on purpose, right? Like there's some paintings by Frida Kahlo, for example, where the one where there's a woman that's been stabbed, where she splattered the frame and drips the blood into it. She did that on purpose. And the back of the frame tells this story. What I learned at the Pike Place Market, I had a bin there with matted work that was shrink wrapped, and people would go through it and they would pick it up and then they go like this. They look at the back to see the name, the title. Don't get me started on the title. Some of you are, titles are very, very important. The example that I've given you, and forgive me, you guys have heard this story like 5 times by now. What I tell in my seminar is you have I project a drawing of a nude woman running, and it's a long composition, and she's at one end, and she's nude and she's running. And I say, if this piece is untitled, okay, it doesn't really tell you anything, still something. If this piece is titled Nude Running, okay, you just describe the art. But if the piece is titled Eve running away from Eden, see how that changes the entire psychological punch of the work? You have no idea how many pieces of art I have sold where the title and the artwork have combined to make the connection, because the collector has to feel something for it, right? Something that speaks to it. And that's why I'm such a big, big believer in titles. All right, you also need to learn about this, because this word print has been kidnapped in the modern world, where you can pretty much do anything, take it to a printer, and they'll make you 100 copies. A print is an etching, a line cut, a wood cut. If there is a piece of art here, and then somebody takes it somewhere and they make them 100 copies of it, that's a reproduction. Okay? But a dubious art dealer would say, oh, this is a print of the work. It's not. It's a reproduction. But the word reproduction doesn't sound sexy for selling art, right? It's print. Nicolet is the fancy art world for jet printer, right? They've become very good. And this is where archival comes again. If you're going to reproduce your work with giclée, you got to make sure that it's something that lasts. The average age of a printed colored thing you print and you print there at home is 5 to 10 years. They now have combinations that last maybe 100 years, which is important. People have sometimes issues with digital artwork. I think that people eventually are going to have to, including myself at one point. 20 years ago, I wrote an article about digital photography. And it's come to bite me in the butt many, many times since then. Because digital photography is just technology moving forward. When photography first came around in the 1800s, all the art establishments were like, this isn't real art, and it took Stieglitz to drag it away from that world into the fine arts world. Same thing with glass. People think of glass as pretty glass and objects and all that, and it's just a substrate. So technology is technology. I think there's at least one painting in here, in this show, that I think is an AI painting that has been produced through artificial intelligence by giving it a few words. I also been shown a couple of times your new AI Hodag. I don't know if anybody can see that. But there is an image in the internet of a really scary looking, very realistic Hodag. And it's posed in front of the Capitol, right? Yeah.
Courthouse.
Courthouse. Okay. All right. For the buyers in the audience, hopefully there's some. That's the first rule. If some dealer or somebody comes to you and says, you should buy this because, and the because is not because you like it, run away. Because if it's because it's going to go up in price in 10 years, well, why aren't you buying it? No, you should buy it because you like it. And now that you know about reproduction, buy the original. Don't buy prints. If you can't afford the original, then buy a real limited edition. That means something. Ask about smaller original. This is all sort of stuff that I learned over the years selling artwork as well, right? And keep in touch with the artists. All right, ready for the show? About time. This piece of art fooled me. Every show that I've done over the years, there's always something that fools me. It's even on the wrong side of things, especially, everybody here remembers slides, right? So you have no idea how jurors used to get fooled by slides because they all get projected and they're all pretty much the same size, gigantic. And you go, wow, it's really good. And you pick it and it's like this big, right? So you get fooled by that. I was fooled by this because the entire jurying process, when I was walking by it, and Leonette can tell you, we were there for hours. I actually thought it was a photograph. And this is a charcoal drawing. And I work in charcoal. And in 40 years of selling, seeing, creating artwork, I have never, ever come across such a talented charcoal artist as this person, whoever he or she is. Are they here?
Yeah. Right there. Right there.
Oh. Wow, and she's young too. That is, I stand in awe. That is spectacular. You get this close to not winning anything because I thought it was a photograph. It's close. And then for the photograph, I'm thinking, it needs a little more definite. And then when I looked at it, and I really, really inspected it, because so it is absolutely spectacular. Same thing. I think. Where is Lepine Lepine? Lepine, sorry. The other piece that you have in this show, is that earlier? You have two pieces.
That was first, yeah.
That one was first, right? And I think if I saw the dates right, it's 3 years apart. The one is 2018. I was incredibly impressed the progress from the first piece to this. I don't know how long you've been painting, but the progress from that piece, both are really good. But this one is bordering on spectacular. It's really, really what I think Emma Lepine has done. Because the reason she threw me off, she has it as I think that's either 1018, which is a time traveler, or exclamation point 18. What is it?
October 2018.
Oh, October 2018. Okay. I like, you should have said, no, I am trying to travel. This is superbly well done, well painted. It's exquisite. And this is going to sound a little weird, but it reminded me a little bit. I'm sure there's enough people in here kind of my age that would remember the Sears and Woolworth's Big Eye Kids, right? If you haven't seen the story of that woman who's an amazing painter, it's really sad because her husband was kind of, was really abusive and forcing her to do it. You know, those paintings are worth a ton of money now. They're immensely. So this, when I first glanced at it, and then what the painting's done is she's actually put a psychological story behind these pieces that border on fantasy. They are fantasy, right? That border on fantasy and tell a story, but regardless, show really, really, really well-developed painting skills. Some of the things that she has done here are not easy to do, right? She's crossing some boundaries here for the betterment of the art. I think that this piece is again, if I recall right, I gave her one of the prizes. It's one of the more memorable ones. I've been posting this work on my social media, and this work and yours have been the one that have been getting all of the comments. So well done, Emma. Really good job. This work also took me. I took two pieces in by this artist, and I hope that this work sells because he couldn't afford to send both of them, right? And he only sent this one. I'm a big fan of what's called trompe l'oeil, fool the eye painting. This is not a trompe l'oeil because he's not trying to fool the eye, because he's showing you he or she. Was it a woman? He. You can still, when you look at it, you can still see the brushwork. So one of the hardest things to do is to be able to deliver a painting of this quality and this sort of vision and still show you the brushiness. This is kind of what every painting class tries to instill in every artist. There's also some interesting story here, right? You know, the crown made out of the fast food, so it tells you more. It's a narrative painting. There's a story that goes with it but again, I was superbly impressed by the painting skills of the artist. This is essentially another time traveler. This is kind of like a Roman fresco type work. It's done actually as a fresco. There's no Roman that ever did one like this, where it's nuanced and it's hidden in there. But not only does it give me the opportunity to highlight this very, very good piece of artwork, but also to tell you another story. So, in the Annals of Rome, it's written that there were two muralists in Rome that were always arguing with each other about who was the best muralist and alfresco painter in all of Rome. And one of them knew a senator, so the senator says, "Why don't you and your competitor each bring a piece and let the Senate vote on it?" The Romans, of course, were really, really, really good at alfresco painting. So the day of the voting, there's two pieces of artwork there behind curtains, and the first guy comes over. He opens the curtain. The senators are like, they're eyeing about how good the work is. So then they said to the next artist, "Okay, can you please open the curtains and show us your painting?" And he goes, "That is my painting." They don't tell you why. I also like this work. This work is very, very well done. This is another full DI painter, trompe l'oeil. And again, this painter, when you look at the work, if you examine it close enough, you can still see the brushiness. You can still see the brushwork. You can still see how she defies gravity. Some of these things are almost a little exaggerated, right? But what really makes this a really good painting, in my opinion, is if this was gigantic or even bigger this size, and you were to take a square and cut that, there's an amazing abstract painting in there as well. Same thing in the body of the bird, right? So she has not left anything to chance. She has really worked it and worked it and worked it to deliver to deliver this beautiful piece. If you were to ask, if she was to ask me what I would change, I would tell her to start maybe finding a little bit more aggressive subject matter. You know what I mean? And the reason I say that is because, fortunately or unfortunately, in China there are these things called painting villages. And one of the things that all of these garbage galleries, if you ever see a gallery and the part of the name is gallery, stay away from that. If they're ever on the main street of a really expensive part of a big city where a real gallery usually can't afford the rent, don't go in there. So what? Yeah, and you've seen it. They sell the giant paintings of cigars, and so this sort of subject matter has been kidnapped by those places. So there's, you know, you can buy this beautiful original China paintings of wine bottles and of drinks and stuff like that. So my constructive criticism to this artist is, man, you have it down pat. You are really, really good. Explore some areas. I told some of the amazing ladies that were helping me the story of an artist that I started showing maybe 10, 15 years ago, and she was a hyperrealist. She's a professor. She still teaches at Georgetown in DC. And she had the most amazing paintings of cookies, Oreos, and everything else. And she came to me, and I said, Sharon, I love your work, but you know, in New York, this might be a little hard to sell, no matter how realistic it is. I said, try to find something that you think has a little niche that's a little different. Like a year later, she came back, and she had the most spectacular paintings of vintage comic books I have ever seen. When I saw them, my eyes went like, oh my God, right? Took two of them, she's really slow, maybe 2, 3 paintings a year. Took 2 of them to an art fair in New York. They were $1,500, sold them in the first 10 minutes. Doubled the price for the next fair, sold them right away. Took them to Miami at now $5,000, sold them right away. Then she calls me, and she says, Lenny, I feel really bad. I got this gallery in New York. I saw the work in Miami and is really interested in representing me, but they have a world exclusive contract. Every artist, you know, a gallery contract. So I said, Sharon, are you nuts? Go with them, right? $250,000 is how much her work goes for now. And she has a waiting list. Because she found a niche of people that are not only art collectors and have the disposable income, but also are comic book collectors. And she's at the point where Wayne Gretzky wanted to commission, I guess he collects baseball cards, or right, to commission like the most expensive card in the world that he owns on his Wagner, right? And she said, no, I don't like doing it.
Good for her.
Yes. This is another trunk oil painting. I really looked at this puppy. I wanted to make sure that, you know, there was not because this day, you could really do some printing on almost any surface. This is a real painting. This is an artist that I also would put towards the skill here is beyond belief to be able to deliver technically wise. Not everything. The tapestry of art has room for everything. And modern art says that everything is art, right? So, but I'm always astounded by the skill that it, just like your drawings. It's that level of skill, but with a brush, that a human being can produce these kind of works. The reason, how I found out is that in here, if you go look back in there, he signed every one of them. His initials are in here, right? And they're slightly different because it's impossible to do the letters pretty much the same way each time, especially when you do it that little. This, I have never in my entire life did a taxidermy work, but this is an amazing work of art. I live in Maryland. My backyard is to state property. Deer are my constant enemy. I have to grow all my tomatoes in my deck. You know, you go out to get the mail at night, and they are there eating next to the mail, and they go, hey, hey. You know, they're not afraid of anybody. But when I actually saw this piece, the work that this artist has put in here is spectacular. How she has painted parts of it. You take this, if you forget the fact that it's a deer, and I like the fact that it's a deer head, and you just look at the work that's involved in there, I don't know, I almost see sometimes often I see Middle Eastern influences in there. I see all kinds of things. This is an extraordinary amount of time and effort and work. And the substrate in the deer is the substrate, taxidermy, right? The substrate doesn't make the difference. Many years ago, I was talking to the curator of the Hirshhorn, and I was trying to get them to buy a piece of art by a glass artist who was pushing glass, like Steiger's did to photography, out of the crafts world. And she said, Olga Viso, her name, she said, the Hirshhorn does not collect glass. And I went, huh. So do you guys collect chocolate? And she knew I had her because they have a sculpture made out of chocolate. That's an artist. My point was the substrate, the thing that the art is done on shouldn't matter. It's the artwork that matters. By the way, that piece of chocolate is, you know what happens to chocolate, right? After like 30, 40 years. Yeah, it's not an exhibit anywhere because I'm sure it's pretty bad. Is this artist here?
Yes.
Where?
Back here.
Well done. Watercolor, by far, is the most difficult of all genres. People, unfortunately, think of watercolor as, oh, this is what you do on your way up to oil painting. No. There are, the difference between a good watercolor artist and a great watercolor artist is that the great watercolor artist learns how to use their mistakes. Because everybody will make a mistake in every single watercolor. If you learn how to use it and incorporate it into the painting, you just graduated into being a great watercolor artist. This is a master at work. This is a watercolor artist that knows that you don't get gray by mixing black and white, but that has painted watercolor for so many years and made so many mistakes mixing color that she could do it, he or she, it's a she, right? I met she.
She's here.
Yeah, I met her. Yeah. She made 300,000 mistakes mixing to get that kind of gray before she got it. And then from there on, it's an automatic, right? And Malcolm Gladwell invented the rule of the whatever it is, the 10,000 hour to become an expert at anything. I think for watercolor, it's more like a 10,000 hours to become a watercolor. From something as simple as the splattering here of the paint to something as difficult, but that she makes it seem so natural as to the ability to match that square to that square to that one to that one to that one and to the outside. That is a that looks like when you see the final product, you think, but that is so difficult, so difficult. So this was definitely a prize winner from the very beginning. Very well done. I was talking to the artist earlier. A lot of my writing is when I find something in somebody else's writing, because art critics are not used to being criticized, so I love doing that, right? I love criticizing what they write, especially when they write something so stupid and so nose up in the air, right? And they seem to all go to the same art critic school where they have an antipathy for certain subjects, right? Barns being one of them, right? So like, oh, somebody paints a barn, and then if you were one of them and you, for whatever reason, you like this artist, oh, this is a perfect example of the abandonment of the American culture to the blah, blah, blah. Right? Which is how they like to describe it. Another great piece. Okay, this artist is here, right? I spent some time talking to him. This is a spectacular painting. I have this on my social media, and I already have 3 or 4 people ready to kill each other over the arguing and the fighting that they're doing over it. One of them is an ex-Navy friend of mine who's very right-wing, and one of them is a friend of mine who's an artist who's very left-wing. So they're all arguing about the meaning of the painting, which is good, because that means that the work elicited something, right, from people. It is, this artist has some very, very well developed painting skills. It takes an immense amount of courage to be able to work in that scale too, which is as all of you know, it's not easy, especially that good. If you've been to the St. Petersburg Museum in Florida, the Dali Museum, you see the incredible size that Salvador Dali worked in some of these things. I love Dali. If Dali was alive today with social media, it would be like a superstar, right? You know how he arrived in New York? He had an egg built that could be, and then the ship came within a mile of New York, and he went inside the egg, they screwed the egg together, they threw him over the side, and all these photographers were waiting in Coney Island, and then the wave comes in, people run over, open the egg, and out comes Dali. It was like in 1930, right? He also said, if you can't paint well, paint big. If you can't paint at all, teach painting. But Robert here can not only paint well, but he can paint superbly well. Another thing I want to point out that's very, very difficult technically, having tried and failed miserably many times, is the application of gold paint or gold leaf. It takes the patience of the saint to be able to do that. This kind of work, of course, elicits all kinds of responses. You know, what's going on in here? That's the power that's the power of representational artwork with a story, right? We don't know. If I wanted to take one side of this painting, I could do it. If I wanted to take the other, I was telling somebody earlier the story. How am I doing for time? Right. Okay. I have this, when I had the galleries, I had this artist, I still he's a really good friend of mine named Chawi Friend. Brilliant painter. Amazing painting skills. He's originally from Lebanon, Maronite Christian, which is the most ancient form of Christianity in that part of the Middle East. Actually, no, because the priest in our church is from Lebanon, and he's painting the ass because he's so old-fashioned with some of the things. Anyway, Chawi is, because he was raised in war and all that, sort of a very anti-war kind of painter, very, very political. The last artist in DC that the New York Times did a full-page review of his work in the New York Times. So a year or two after 9/11, he had this series of paintings, which I know where Chawi comes from. You know, like the White House with a body in front of it covering the American flag. But he was coming from the kind of pacifist sort of side of things. So German television came to the gallery. I'm telling the story just to see how you can take this, if the artist leaves it to the interpreter, how interpretation really counts, right? Because there's different ways to interpret. I knew 100% what Chawi was saying in his work. One of the pieces was kind of like the sleeping racks that they would have in Auschwitz or something like that. And in one of them was another body cover with the flag and the feet were sticking out. And I can't remember the title. German television came to do a review of the show, and they asked Charlie if he wanted to talk about it, and he's like, no. I'll say it like he says, no, let Lenny talk about it. That sounded Italian. My Middle Eastern accent is going bad there. So, if he let me do it, so that I gave him my interpretation. So I started saying, well, clearly what the artist is trying to portray here is his deep, entrenched admiration for these Americans that are giving their life to support their country. This is a hero. And I could see his vein going on. He just, you know, so from now on, that's what's on record, you know. And it's exactly the opposite of what he meant. I did it on purpose because, you know, I wanted him to learn the lesson too. That was a great piece of art. This person also won an award. I think he's like almost like a Diego Rivera reincarnated, or one of those great Mexican muralists. What I like about this work, again, like if you took this piece by itself, it's actually not that good of a painting by itself. You know, the blending and all that. Put it together with all that's going on in here, and the reason that I say Diego Rivera is because I see Rivera and I see Kahlo in there. Those guys are behind the two Fridas. The way that these things are worked, and even the action of the guy is like those Mexican murals of the 30s and 40s. And scale in this case count. This is another work where there's all kinds of different paintings going on in here, right? It's a beautiful abstract here, 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 there. And scale really makes a difference here for this piece. This is another work that I'm sure this artist has a story behind here. The narration, the way that it's shown here doesn't show the nuances of how soft it is. This is a pastel. And the title is something, who remembers the title now? Something about the owls, right? Probably by the barn owls, right? But I'm sure there's a narration. I am very, very attracted to artwork that tells a story, that gives a narration, that gives it room to be interpreted. So I really quite like this piece as well. This is a class in the power of color, right? So cool colors recede, warm colors come forward, right? It's like you learn that in painting 101. And she plays with that, right? She plays with that to the extreme with this almost unbelievable cloud. This is like somebody on Photoshop going on max saturation, but it's a really beautiful oil painting. The texture in the cloud, and the way that she challenges herself by placing the cool colors in the front and still manages to make it work. This warm cloud is trying so hard to come forward, and it gets pulled back by the blue behind it. It's a really, really beautiful piece. Is this artist here? She had to. No. This work attracted me because the two things, the scale and every time I stand in front of it, it looks different. Like it seems to be in constant motion. He has it listed as photography, but I'm curious. I don't know, is the artist here? I'm curious, is this somehow digitally enhanced? How did you do this? Because you've managed to track this movement, which is really hard to do, right?
The original photograph is of sparkles on waves on Lake Superior. Mm. So it's at sunset, so the squiggles were gold against a black background. I removed the black background, I layered 3 images together, created the color gradients, so that the shapes are true to form of what they were. I simply played with the contrast.
And you've achieved a spectacular display of movement here.
Mama Nature's a good artist.
Yeah, but what you just said, the way that he just described that so like quickly and fast, right? And yeah. I bet you that he's the only one in here, probably in this entire state that can do that. What you ended up with here is like a living thing. You know, it's like a living piece of artwork. It's really, really good. Thank you. This drawing, I later on I discovered this is a part of the gentleman is part of the faculty here, right? By the way, every single piece that enter when you get your artwork back, I have some criticism. Leonette was valiant enough to hang with me for a few hours, and I gave, in most cases, direct criticism about the art, observations, and also constructive criticism if it needed it. This work, this artist, I gave him I told him that he really needed to work on his titles. Because remember what I told you about titling and how that helps, right? So Leonette and I worked she's got about half a dozen titles that we offered him. like one of them is, think of her thinking like, should I really apply to college? Go to the Army? But it is an absolutely spectacular drawing. And the next time you go in there and see this drawing, look at it real close. Look at her face. Look at the way, when you're up close, how he's applied those highlights, that when you see the drawing, step back, bring her forward, right? because the way that he's applied it, only a mastered person that can draw can do. The way that he has, by the way, done the top of the drawing at one definition and left the bottom flow alone, it's also so difficult to do unless you have the grounding to be able to get away with, right? Because the natural thing with artists is you want to keep on working it, and you sometimes overwork it. So that alone is hard to do. But observe the mastery in the highlights that he's applied in here. This is drawn from life, obviously, and it is superbly well done. This piece, what attracted me about this piece, this is almost like two paintings in one, right? Because look at how well defined the child is, the hair and all that. And then look at the background, how it's almost cartoony. Look at the clouds, right? And she gets away with it because she has to so seduced right away by the image of the child. Great title, by the way. Close Encounters of the Blue Kind. Again, someone who has the skill to be able to get with the human figure, because humans, scientists have figured out that humans have a 12 visual checkup of other humans that we normally do, distance between the eyes, width of the hip, and they figured out that that's because Homo sapiens and Neanderthal coexisted for thousands of years. So you have to know, is this girl a human, or is she one of those other that other kind? They coexisted in the Middle East, in Europe. Almost every European has a tiny percentage of Neanderthal in them, and a new species called Denisovan. The reason I know that, since you asked, is that about 8-9 years ago, my wife gave me a DNA kit as a present, and it was from the National Geographic in DC. So they don't tell you you're 10% Irish and 5% Austrian, none of that bull. They give you scientific DNA type things, right? So I did the swab, sent it in, and then they say 3-4 weeks log in to it's called the Genome Project. They were mapping mankind. They finished doing it now. I log in and to my account with the thing, and it says, "Can you call this number?" I'm like, huh. So I called him, and the guy says, "Hey, you notice you live in Potomac, which is half an hour away from downtown DC where the National Geo is. Can you come up here? We'd like to talk to you and maybe do a more scientific DNA test." And I'm like, "Why?" And he says, "Well, at that time," he said, "we've done about 90 million people, and you have the highest ever recorded non-human DNA." So I went, and they drew blood and all that, and ended up being that I had about 4%, which is pretty significant, Neanderthal. And my wife is like, "Oh, I could have told him that." And it actually, the guy explained it to me because my grandparents on my father's side came from the mountains. Mountain people don't move around too much, right? And he says in that part of the mountains in northern Spain, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of caves where Homo sapiens and Neanderthal coexisted for thousands of years. In fact, the village where my grandfather came from is called Villa Gallegos, which means Gaelic village. And starting in Roman times, their big thing was using the caves to store wine. This is still what they do pretty much for a living. When I went over there, the town historian guy says, this village has records going back almost 3,000 years, and there's never been more than 790 people that have ever lived in this village. So your grandfather did a good thing in leaving, because the DNA here is a little sketchy. This work also won a prize. What attracted me about this piece is the spectacular brush work in this piece. Remember how we talked about the Trump Royal, how they go to extreme pains to hide the brush work, to fool the eye. This artist is completely the opposite. She's able to capture light with color which is also really, you probably think this thing is completely, a lot of white in there. There is white, but the white is never white, except where it really counts, right? Very few small amounts here to pop out the white. A really good color painting should minimize the use of white, but where white is used, it really pops the work out. This is almost like a lesson in brushwork and in color. I believe this piece was acquired by the college for their collection. So that's, is this all you see?
Yeah.
No? All right. We all got wet when we stood in front of this painting. This is almost the same thing. I can say this is all the brushwork in this painting is amazing. The way that the artist has captured motion is unreal. You know, and if you see, there's no definition here. This is all brushstrokes. He has captured every single thing that your brain fills in as a swan. You're not going to believe what his last name is. Swanson. I'm curious until he does, right? But it's a master class in if this painting was this, is what in the 50s they would call an action painting, right? But it would be completely abstract. Really, 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 really well done. This time-lapse photography, I bet you this guy spends hours visiting this place. Is this nearby anywhere?
Yes.
Yeah, it is?
Madison, yeah.
Yeah. Is this photographer here?
No.
No? But I'm always attracted by people that would go, you know, there's a guy at the Louvre in France that's been going there for 30 years. He's got a book out. You should look at it online. And all he waits for is so he sits in front of different paintings each time. And all he waits for is for a person to come to look at the painting that's wearing a dress or something that matches or works with the art. And he's got so many photographs of women mostly, like standing in front of the water lily, and the dress is, guess what, a reproduction of the lilies or something. And it floats right in. It's incredible. So Ansel Adams said that every black and white photograph should have at least 30 nuances of white, right? So he's done that here. See how much whiter these are here? In the old days, I don't know if this is a digital photograph or a darkroom one. Photographers are the biggest nerds of the art world. They're still doing palladium prints and things that they were doing in the 1800s with stones and things. But digital photography, so there's room for everybody, right? But in the old days, you would have to sit in the darkroom and burn this side and burn that side to highlight it. Now with Photoshop and things, you become a master of that. You can still produce it. And he's done that. He's got so many different shades of white working in there that add, right, to the movement of the piece. The spectacular dimension of the work is really large, also quite helps. Almost the opposite here. Is this photographer here? Yeah, so this beautiful photograph is almost like a painting. If you look at it really close, in fact, the way that he's done the texture, have you done any digital manipulation of it at all? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because the texture that you achieved here is beyond belief. It's almost got, you could almost sense brushwork in there, right? And the way that it fades, I was immediately attracted. I also like, of course, the composition. You know, the panoramic view of this really, really helped. But the way that the work dissipates, I've seen, minus that part, I've seen that scene so many times in Scotland. So I always admire how the weather can be incorporated into a photograph. These are things that painters rarely are able to achieve to the level of visual skill that a master photographer can do. So congratulations, it's really well done. I was really fooled by this. I thought this was a digital thing that the person had put together from all kinds of different things, and she had planted all these umbrellas in there. Then I found out that no, this is, they do this in Warsaw, and they hang it up. And in a way, what that means is that cheap capture of moment in time, right? a moment in time that is so surreal that I can guarantee you that if you're not from around here, almost everyone will think that she has worked this up and manipulated and done it. It's really, really well done. It's also really well presented. And it's a real good deal. Really inexpensive. So, along the same sort of observational skills that photographers seem to have kind of developed more and more and more now that photography has become sort of more accessible to the masses, is this work. This image, the way that it captures the reflections, I'm assuming they're water reflections. When I first saw it, when I was doing the work, at first I had to go in and look to see what kind of media it was, because I thought it was a painting. That, especially the way that some parts of it, the blues, for example, are so well encapsulated. Is this photographer here? Yeah, there you go. So it is another one in a different sense, similar to that splash. There's so much movement here, but this is almost like quiet movement, right? And the ability that the photographer has done and capture that, and I don't even want to know how many times hours you spend trying to get the perfect image to it, but it's really, really well achieved and really well done. Congratulations. And then there's the simplicity of this photograph. This was also one of my favorites. I'm probably one of the top artists in the world, in my own opinion. But I'm probably one of the worst photographers ever. I am really, really bad at doing that. And so I know from experience that something that looks so deceptively simple is so hard to do. To be able to capture the simple beauty. I like this photograph because it's at the polar extreme of the other ones that have all that sort of busyness and intensity to it. This shows sometimes the simplicity of the beauty of simplicity in art. Nothing, almost also like a flower. And then we get this one, which is, when I first saw it, I thought it was a painting, right? Because of the texture that she's able to, is it she? Is that you? Yeah. The texture that you're able to deliver there, oh my God, it almost looks like it's wax, and it has so many layers to it. So this is way out here. At the end of the photograph, it's gone, it's dissipated. So it's also a piece that immediately attracted me. When I was preparing the talk, I wanted to make sure I had the three and these guys together. Because they're essentially not the same flower, but the same subject, but it shows the immense power of the brain to present similar subjects in different ways. This is a really, really intensely good achievement. Congratulations. Thank you. Which brings me to this piece, which somehow kind of fitted in here. I was attracted by the way that a story is kind of told in the way that she has blended, he or she, is it she? Has blended the shadows and the tree shapes into the subject. Is the woman thinking about the trees, or are the trees thinking about her, right? Because they're alive. I also like the proportion, the scale that it was done in, and the simplicity and the economy of the brushwork in this case, as compared to some of the others that we have done. It takes a lot of courage, knowing this. It takes a lot of courage once you've done that figure to start kind of working the things that don't belong there. And being able to get away with doing this and this to the body, right? And still making it believable and beautiful and part of the work is deceptively hard, I can tell you that much. Is this artist here? No? I was attracted to this one. This part sold me right away. The way that she has kind of captured a little bit of magic, I think, in the face of the fairy, of the child in there. I gave a lot of feedback to this artist and lots of different things. I think that the narrative says when she's growing the dandelions, are they becoming the fairies, or are the fairies enjoying it, or are they sneezing because they're allergic? But it's another attractive painting that has a complete different storyline behind it. There's a whole school of British fantasy painting in the Romantic period that kind of explored this theme a lot. And I've always been very attracted to that. This piece, which is in the front up there, I have two reactions to it. One is it's almost like it's sometimes a little scary. I don't know if it's the fact that why is every tree the same, and then you see how the artist has very intelligently juxtaposed that with the irregular mountains, right? There's something slightly disturbing about the world, which is good because it elicits a response. Then, on the complete opposite, you know, Lenny version 2 comes up and says, this is like so peaceful. You know, so you can have either or reaction. It's peaceful, it's, you know, this is a perfect place. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going outside to hang their laundry, right? So somehow she's managed to explore, it's a she? Anyway, he or she has managed to explore both angles in the approach. I was actually coming up close, trying to look through the window to see if, and there are things in there. I haven't been able to figure it out, but she has put things inside those windows too that are clues about the work. So it delivers really, really. Is Laura Lee here? Oh, there you go. Congratulations. So really good. And I know, not too far from that house, these guys live. This work, I'm a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe. So this it says over there, Nevermore. And there's so many things going on, and this is a very substantial work as well. So many things going on in here. He could have easily gotten away with the trees and the crows, but no, he goes into this intense drill of adding all this texture to the rest of the work. That really is kind of what makes the piece, because the fact that it's an homage to Poe, you know, arguably most famous poem, it's almost lost in the beauty of the artwork. And then he gives us interesting clues, like this blue sky here, and then the way that this color is down here to suggest the ground, even though we know we're above. It's like a perspective and an angle that is really that is really kind of quizzical in the way that we're trying to figure out what kind of trees are these? You know, are these trees or are those clouds? And the fact that we're asking and questioning those things, I think, is going to make this a really, really successful piece. Is this artist first? There it is. Well done. All right. So, I am completely open to questions. If you're too chicken to ask me, you can email me. Don't make me get an eraser. Does anybody have a question? Go on. I know you have questions. Yes, sir.
All right, I'll take one. You've been deep in the art world, and you've been deep in the math world with cryptography and everything else. You would say conventional thinking is art and math are opposites of each other, but there are things like the golden ratio and forms in nature that work with each other.
Right.
So I have a two-part question. My first is, do you think, having been deep in each field, that they're divergent or they overlap? And without telling us which photo you think is being AI generated, what is the tell to you? Was it too mathematical or insufficiently art? What said this is an algorithm?
Those are really, really good questions. The first rule of cryptology is that there are no coincidences, right? There's no such thing as a coincidence. And I mean, there are coincidences, but in cryptology, there are no coincidences. The marriage of art and cryptology, I found to, in my career, that it was sort of very beneficial. I was really, really good for college. And the Navy is really good. The Navy, I don't know how, was really good at detecting that early. So when I was enlisted, they very quickly wanted me to go the officer route. The art came sort of a little bit as a side effect, but it ended up really helping me, especially when it was the kind of back in the 80s and early 90s. I was a Middle East, North Africa analyst mostly, because I could be dropped in and blend in. And I had a Marine who was an Arabic linguist and Hebrew linguist, who the native speakers, he was from Mississippi. And the native speakers were like this when they heard him talk. He was so gifted. And those are hard languages, right? To learn as a second language. He's retired now. He's actually a preacher in Mississippi. But the art part came that we could get dropped in places where we could sort of blend in, and always my approach was I always came in as an artist sort of thing, or as an art dealer or whatever, back in those days. So that was the kind of way that I complemented it. As far as mathematical things like the Golden ratio and all that, I think that artists, especially once they develop a natural way of viewing things, they kind of almost do that subconsciously. I wouldn't be surprised if there's still artists that measure and do that sort of stuff. I didn't really talk about composition in a lot of this work, but mathematical composition, there's formulas for composition that artists have used for centuries that also kind of, I think, subconsciously now get applied. Triangles within triangles, squares within squares. It takes about 1/100 of a second for anybody to see if perspective is wrong in a painting, right? Things of that sort that the eye does. And I've already forgotten the second question.
On the AI generated image.
Oh, right. So it's not a photograph. About 2 months ago, maybe less, maybe 6 weeks ago, you can still find it on Google. There was a prize in Britain, £40,000, a significant prize that was awarded to an artist for whatever that was the painting that he had done. After the prize was awarded, he came out and he said, "I didn't do this. This was a AI-generated painting." And the jurors said, "Oh, okay, we don't care. You still have the prize." He refused it because his point was, where's that line? Where does that line get sort of divided? The reason that I think this particular piece is AI generated is the juxtaposition of so many discordant chunks and bits and pieces of imagery that the artist has really elegantly and intelligently put together to deliver the piece. I just cannot see the brush in the mind being able to sort of do that, especially in parts with the natural instinct of a painter, is not to do what he or she did in that painting, because it will disturb the rest.
So you're saying it has no cohesive pattern?
No. There's parts of the painting that have no cohesive pattern to it. Yeah. And still, at the end, it worked. At the end, it worked.
Before we take another question, I should probably announce the Audience Choice Award.
Yes.
Okay, so the Audience Choice Award tonight is the Embellished Deer. By
It
was a very close evening. Coming in very close second was Beneath the Trees by Jean Dupre. And for third, which they aren't the audience choice, but I just so everyone knows how close it was. There was a tie between the Rufus Martini Splash by Rebecca Korth and Brian Keither's Absolute Silence Barred Owl. So.
Any more questions? I know I've been here for a long time, so if you don't have any more, that's fine. No? Okay, before you go, In here, I bring this to art fairs. These are prints and drawings and things that I did mostly in art school. And I'm going to write down a number here. And if you want to play, you tell me a number. Whoever comes close, I will let them come in here and pick one of these as a gift from me.
How many digits?
How many digits? Okay, there's how many people here? Because we have to have. Let's see. Let's keep it simple. How about between 0 and 25?
Did you already write it down?
I just wrote it down. Yes.
17.
18, 9,
13,
9,
20, 23,
11. Who said 11? Okay, that's what it is. Who said 9? Ah, you get one too.